Alyssa, if you're mixing margaritas, mix one for me, please. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to week 6, ED 720 curriculum class. Glad you joined me. This is the last Zoom session. You'll have to look at my ugly mug. Although I'd talk to any of you on Zoom whenever you wanted to, if you wanted to. Glad you're back. The chat box is open, and you're welcome to post questions or comments there if you'd like to. Remember, please, that in week 7, we don't have a Zoom session, and you have a final exam. That will be posted in the final exam will be posted in the week 7 Moodle module. And please also remember that in week 7, your assignments are due on Saturday night instead of Sunday night. Also, at this time every term, around this time every term, they send out the course evaluations to you all. So if you have nice and good things to say about me, I encourage you to fill those puppies out. If you're not going to say nice things about me, forget to do it, or no, I want to hear your feedback one way or the other. I would appreciate it greatly. It'll help me do a better job the next time around. Some of you will have me again in other classes, and some of you are about to graduate. Congratulations to those of you. I know how big that is. When I was a principal of a large comprehensive high school in Austin, Texas, I would often get up at 3:30 in the morning to start hammering down my email, just so I felt like I would have a fighting chance to be successful during the coming day. And my Monday mornings with you all kind of remind me of those early mornings of that as that large high school principal. Boy, you all are busy on Sunday. Very busy. Everybody has their microphone. There we go. Week 7 module will open up. It may already be open. Is it open already? If y'all looked? I know it's going to open up tomorrow, if not before. And you'll be able to work on that a little earlier, get a little earlier start on it in order to help you meet your earlier deadline for your submissions. Structurally, it's going to be identical to weeks 1 through 6. I think most of you all figured out the drill by now, except that there'll be the final exam sitting there at the very bottom of that. I'm hopeful that most of you are well on your way to completing the final exam. In fact, I got an email from one of you today and asked me to take a look at your final exam responses and see if you're on the right track. I'm happy to do that. In Learning Task 5.1, that I did, in fact, I just finished grading the last learning task from week 5 about an hour ago and got that posted in the grade book. A reminder to all of you, someone asked me that by email as well today. The offer is open to you. If you ever get a grade that you would like to improve on, feel free to resubmit those assignments, with one exception. If you got dinged for turning it in late, then I'm probably not going to give you an improved grade. But if you got dinged for less than stellar performance, at least in the eyes of the professor, you can take another run at it for an improved grade. In Learning Task 5.1, Cassandra noted that she has seen the IB, the International Baccalaureate program, used kind of detrimentally. I have too, Cassandra. I have seen IB, and I've seen Advanced Placement, and I've seen Accelerated Reader at the elementary level. All of those institutions or instructional concepts, I've seen them used as learning inhibitors rather than learning accelerators. Here's why. That's the nature of any kind of tool. Any kind of tool. As you all know, I live on my ranch out in West Texas, and I have a lot of tools, including tractors and hay buggies and welding machines and all that kind of stuff, 16-pound sledgehammers. And all those tools can be used for good, just like a pencil or a microphone, or they can be used for ill. And in the case of Cassandra's remarks, I have, unfortunately, I'll take accelerated reader because many of you, most of you, in fact, are working at the elementary level. I've seen accelerated reader used just marvelously by some campuses and some teachers to create lifelong readers out of children. And I've seen some teachers and campuses pervertedly deploy accelerated reader in such a way that it drove most of the students away from becoming readers. And it just depends on how the tool is used in the hands of the artisan. I like to use the word artisan for teachers, because the skill of the artisan has everything to do with the efficacy of the tool. Marissa referenced, again, concerns about the language transformational reform efforts that seem most often targeted at secondary schools. And that's true. Most of that kind of language you hear aimed at the secondary schools. And here's where I believe that occurs is because most of us feel pretty comfortable with the way elementary schools have historically been structured. And particularly those of you that work in elementary schools know full well, yes, your job is to teach and develop those little young minds and human beings and turn them into holistic and quality citizens. But a large part of your job is custodial. That meaning that the parents view you as the daily babysitter so they can go to work. And we're not going to get away from that concept, I don't think, anytime soon. But also, much of the curriculum content at the elementary level is pretty well defined, and there's a nice scope and sequence, and with a few exceptions, it's fairly general and homogeneous across learning formats. It really doesn't matter much if you're in a public school or a private school or a charter school. There's not a lot of correctional schools at the elementary level. But generally speaking, the curriculum is fairly homogeneous in those elementary grades. But when you start moving into the middle, and then particularly the high school grades, and those students become adolescents and young adults, and they begin branching out and having different interests and courses of study that they're interested in, that's where we begin getting the differentiation in the curriculum. And the opportunity for students to start customizing their approaches somewhat. In Cassandra's case, when she was referencing International Baccalaureate, for those of you that are not familiar with that, that's a global instructional format concept, if you will. It's a proprietary thing, but a lot of high schools, particularly high-performing high schools, historically, have adopted the IB program because it is known to be extremely rigorous. And there are a lot of hoops that you have to jump through and hurdles to clear in order to become an IB campus. What we've seen in the last decade or so is more and more high schools in high poverty areas that have traditionally not been high performing campuses, that districts and those campuses are trying to adopt the IB model in the interest of trying to raise, the performance of the students on their campus, but most importantly, and this is huge, is many of you have read Dr. Carol Dweck's stuff on mindset. They're trying to help those students raise their expectations, not only for their educational aspirations, but their educational performance. Results have been somewhat mixed, as you might expect. But I want to, Marissa, on Learning Task 5.1, Marissa also referenced, when she referenced the transformational reform thing, it brought to mind the work that I've been doing with a small rural district out here in Western Texas for about the last 8 or 10 years. The name of the district is Roscoe Collegiate ISD. and they've got a website, and I welcome you to go look at it. But what is pretty unique about Roscoe, and I've known their superintendent for over 30 years now, Dr. Alexander is a very visionary thinker. But Roscoe is a rural district, high poverty, very poor. And Dr. Alexander has worked there for most of 30 years. And he began to feel like they could do something bigger and better for those children. And so it's been a nice long process for him, but over the span of about 10 years now, and I'm thankful that Kim asked me to work with them and on their advisory board, but they have created a model there for that rural district that all of their elementary students go through, in the primary grades, go through a Montessori type schooling process. One of you mentioned in the discussion forum how daunting it is for many and prohibitive for many high school students that you serve to go to college or even think about graduate school because of the fear of research. Well, at Roscoe Collegiate, they began inundating their third graders into the scientific research process. And as those students, Roscoe also applies the AVID model, which we typically in the nation see only deployed at the high school level, and it's particularly aimed at non-privileged students to try to help them raise their academic aspirations and performance. But Roscoe applies those AVID strategies from pre-K through 12. And then as students move into high school at Roscoe, they are guaranteed at no charge to their parents 60 hours of college credit and an associate's degree as they work their way through that Roscoe High School. So it's very common. In fact, the last two classes at Roscoe, one class had 29 in it, and then I think last year's class had maybe 30. In both of those classes, with the exception of one, maybe two students, those students got, on graduation night, they were handed a high school diploma and they were handed an associate's degree from the local community college. Huge. And what's unique about that is that Dr. Alexander and the school board there at Roscoe has made the decision that they're going to make attaining college credit is common in every high school these days. Every high school. It's not at all uncommon for students to graduate with 15, 30, 45 hours of college credit. Historically, the only ones that have done that have been the students that have come from families of affluence or high education. What's so unique about that Roscoe model is that it's about a 90% low socioeconomic school. And most of those parents couldn't afford to put their children through college classes. And many of those parents don't even have high school diplomas. So it's a great vision that Dr. Alexander and them have had for that campus. And it's just pretty marvelous to see. We are working actively right now, those of us on the advisory board and with Dr. Alexander, to try to replicate that model at other rural schools, both here in Texas, but also in other places in the nation. We've had a lot of interest, particularly in the state of Oklahoma. And interestingly, the state legislature in the state of West Virginia has expressed a lot of interest at trying to apply, we call it the P20 model, but trying to apply that model statewide in the state of West Virginia. So, but my point is this, that is an example, Marissa, of some real transformation. It's not reform, it is transforming the whole system and the whole approach on behalf of children. Pretty cool work. Learning Task 5.2 is the one that centered on the topic of Wiggins and McTighe's understanding by design. I was kind of surprised at how many of you that seemed to be new material, a new concept. I've been a fan of Wiggins and McTighe for almost 20 years now, a long time. And I invite you, by the way, Grant Wiggins has passed away now, but I invite you to look online for Wiggins Students' Bill of Rights. He penned a Bill of Rights for learners, for students, probably in the late 90s, maybe this side of year 2000, I'm not sure. But it's a great encapsulation. I'm not sure that's a word. We'll just play like it is. Of a way that teachers can approach a classroom and a group of learners from a much more equitable point of view, with being willing to make some guarantees to those learners. One of the first superintendents that appointed me as a high school principal there in the Austin, Texas area was very, very forward-thinking and progressive guy. He was actually out of Florida. But Dr. Gall always reminded us that our job as educators was to be, and these were his words, the guarantors of learning. The guarantors of learning. I love that. It's a great way to think about our work. Also in that Learning Task 5.2 content, quite a few of you pinged on the concept of the twin sins of activity, the sin of activity and the sin of coverage. And that's something that the late Dr. Phil Schlechte was really emphatic about, that quite often we get so married to covering a certain, and almost always voluminous amount of content, or becoming so activity laden that we don't get content covered. But Dr. Schlechte was very fond of saying before he passed away that students don't learn from work students don't do. Actually, that's one of the reasons that some of your learning tasks are structured the way they are, because it allows you actually to do the work. That applies to pre-K kids, 4th graders, 8th graders, 10th graders, grad students. It doesn't matter. Learning Task 5.3 was the one that addressed, well, actually, it's the one that had the 2 PowerPoint presentations. And by the way, those, anytime you get a PowerPoint presentation, almost any time, those are the APA citations are generally a little more difficult for you to put your hands on. But one of those addressed the concept of curriculum mapping, which is a great concept and great way to think about developing and curriculum. The work of Dr. Heidi Hayes Jacobs has been very influential in the concept of curriculum mapping for about the last, at least the last 15 years. Heidi's old; she's kind of my age. David, by the way, in consuming that content, David got so interested in that Glathorn's model that he's indicated in his responses that he bought the book and is now working his way through it. Cool. Something else I learned from your responses there, from Lindsay, who, by the way, is a school board member. Oh my, what were you thinking? But Lindsay and others connected the dots between the Simsbury school model and some of the curricula you've actually been researching and digging up on your own. And she also alluded to that, no, it wasn't her, somebody else alluded to that slide on one of those PowerPoints that says, how do you run meetings? Which is an interesting but important piece for that to be in that content. And it reminded me actually of my first book, which I wrote for school principals. I dedicated an entire chapter in that book to helping principals figure out and use strategies to manage all the meetings that they have to basically chair, from meetings as simple as having a parent conference in your office to meetings as large as conducting faculty meetings or community meetings for your local community. The stakeholder involvement seemed to be an interesting dynamic for many of you in that particular content. Oddly, we see that stakeholder involvement in the development of curriculum. Oddly, we see that involvement, and that's one of the points that Lindsay made as a school board member. She was making the point that she really didn't remember ever having been involved in the development of curriculum from that school board seat. We don't see school boards involved much in curriculum development, particularly in the core areas, but we do see school board involvement quite often in curriculum development in the areas of socio-emotional learning, in particular, sex education, civics, health, those kinds of things. And it's probably no surprise to you that the school boards get involved with that kind of stuff because of the political and cultural connotations to those kinds of courses. I just read a couple of weeks ago where my good friend, Dr. Paul Cruz, that's the superintendent of Austin ISD in Texas, he and that school board have just gone through a very painful process of reviewing and adopting and adapting and rewriting their sex education curriculum for the entire K through 12 format. And boy, they've been taking a beating because one of the interesting things that they've now included in the third grade sex education palette, if you will, or the concepts of oral sex and the use of condoms. And so Dr. Cruz, I'm sure, has lost a little sleep, he and school board members, because there are members of that community that are not too fond of that being introduced to their third graders. I'm glad I don't have his job, not anymore, not one like that. Shannon commented on the infamiliarity with organizational structures. And so those of you that are in the MEDL program and aspire to school leadership and administrative roles, you're probably a little more in tune to the concept of structures and organizational structure, and certainly you will be as you move into those leadership roles. But the concept of organizational structure interestingly can have a very important impact, a significant impact on the quality of the curriculum alignment, in particular, curriculum alignment. Some school districts, pardon me, some school districts, from an organizational structure perspective, align their organization in what they call vertical alignments, feeder patterns, if you will. You've got this high school and then 2 or 3 or 4 middle schools that feed it into that high school, and then you typically would have in the vicinity of 15 to 25 elementary schools that feed into those 3 or 4 middle schools. And so those districts that are aligned vertically like that from a structural perspective, and that's the way they build their administrative command and control structure, if that's the way you want to think about it. That's called vertical alignment, and typically those districts that are aligned like that are structurally aligned like that, are somewhat more successful in aligning their curriculum in a vertically aligned way. I mean, there's a little nicer flow from the primary grades to the middle level elementary grades to the junior high middle school grades and then to the high school. So, the other kind of alignment is called horizontal alignment, and generally those districts, from an administrative perspective, they align, for instance, all the primary grades as a team, if you will, And then the upper elementary grades are aligned horizontally as a team. And then the middle school grades, the campuses, their administrators, their teachers, their curriculum teams are all aligned on that horizontal kind of alignment. And then the high school alignment is there, but it's not the vertical nature. It's the teaming, the conversations, the administrative roles and operational roles are all delegated and deployed in that horizontal team setting. Those districts typically have a little more difficulty aligning their curriculum vertically. And mostly it's because the primary grade teachers are not always talking to the upper level elementary grade teachers, and the elementary grade teachers are not having conversations with the middle school teachers, and the middle school teachers are not having that many conversations with the high school teachers, certainly not formalized conversations about trying to align curriculum. So that's for those of you that intend to move into the administrative role, particularly if you think you're going to be a superintendent at some point in time. One day you're going to face the decision about how you want your organization to be aligned, whether you're going to go with the vertical alignment or the horizontal alignment. But when Shannon made that comment, it brought that to my mind. Learning Task 5.4 was when you were looking for the state curriculum search, and Zaina made the point there that the relevancy equates to increased student engagement. Absolutely, exactly, point on. One of the reasons that grad school almost always affects higher levels of engagement, almost always, than does undergraduate school, is because most of you perceive the content that you're consuming in your graduate program as more relevant to your life and your goals and your aspirations than you did your undergraduate stuff. Oddly enough. And most of you, I would bet money that more than half of you changed your major at some point in time in your undergraduate studies, which is very common. But it's partially for that because a lot of students are kind of casting around trying to figure out what they want to be when they get big. But as you know, at the undergraduate level in particular, you have to, kind of like high school, we force you at the university level to take those core classes that are designed to stretch across all the vocational and curricular endeavors, and not all of you are in love with that, and you don't see the relevance of that. But Zaina's point is well made. I would invite you to consider this on that topic of relevance, because particularly we hear the triad: rigor, relevance, and relationships. So that's a Dr. Bill Daggett kind of jingle. You hear that triad a lot. And there's a couple of things about that, comments about that. And I love Dr. Daggett's writing, and he's a very good speaker, a great professional development guy. If you ever have opportunity to participate in one of his workshops. But I have argued always, instead of rigor, relevance, and relationship, I've always argued that I'd like for that relationship thing to be at the front. Relationship, rigor, and relevance. Because I'm convinced that if you don't have some kind of a meaningful relationship with students, it's very hard to be as effective, optimally effective in the teaching of that student. But also on the topic of relevance, which is the reason I went off down this rabbit hole in the first place. I invite you, when you hear that word relevance, and it's powerful, you and all the other learners, if they can attach relevance or meaning to the content or the learning task that they're being asked to do, if they perceive it as relevance, then you're probably going to get a higher level of engagement. So I argue this point as well. Rather than rigor, relevance, and relationship, I would like for it to be relationship, rigor, student perceived relevance. Because sometimes us big people, or the teachers, or you, may think it's relevant to the students, but we have not been successful in bringing the learner to that realization that that relevance is actually relevant to them. So I invite you to think about that when you're laying awake in the middle of the night and not being able to sleep. Your grad school, y'all know you're not sleeping much anyway. Learning Test 5.5, the district to district comparisons that you all are doing, you're getting much better. One, you're getting much better at finding the districts and the content, which that's by design. And also, you're getting much better at doing the analysis. I really appreciate it. I love reading the way your minds work when you're digging around and scratching. And on that topic, Learning Task 4 and Learning Task 5, there's two words that drive my thinking when I create learning tasks like that: variety and choice. Let me say those two again: variety and choice. Whenever I can create a learning task that affords you some degree of variety and choice as you engage in that learning task, then you're probably going to engage in it with a higher level of engagement, because you see it as a little more interesting and a little more relevant if you're the one getting to make some decisions in that piece. So that's an instructional strategy that I almost always try to deploy. I got some book recommendations to you, and then I'm going to jump over and take a look at I see some stuff popping up on the chat box, and I'll take a look and see what you got there. Some books that came to my mind while I was reading through your responses and comments this week. One I've already mentioned to you, but I think it's important enough for me to bring it to your attention again. It's a book by Schwann and McGarvey titled Inevitable: Mass Customized Learning. It's 2012 copyright. And interestingly enough, we are having conversations at the College of Education at LSU Shreveport around that very topic. How can we better create processes, structures, programs of study, and instructional delivery in a way that's more appealing to our students, that invites more, and most importantly, helps you all achieve your goals, rather than us being married to those very homogeneous models. And again, I've said this to you all before. One of the reasons that you're in this class with me tonight at LSUS is because you are voting with your pocketbook, and we're very aware of that. Another book that came to mind, and I mentioned Wiggins and McTighe, their Understanding by Design. It's a great book. In 1999, they wrote one. They've got a lot of publications on that topic. They got rich off of that, by the way. But a couple of old teachers just got rich. But their Understanding by Design handbook is really a good book. But anything you pick up by them, I think you'll be glad that you did. You're glad that you added it to your professional arsenal. And then finally, on the topic of curriculum mapping, I mentioned Dr. Heidi Hayes Jacobs. Last name is Jacobs. She's huge in our world, in the thinking and the conceptualization and the explanation of mapping the curriculum. And a book that she wrote in 2003, I can really recommend to you because it takes the K-12 view of that concept. And the title of it is Mapping the Big Picture, Integrating Curriculum and Assessment K through 12. Heidi Hayes Jacobs. So those are the books that I could recommend to you. And I'm going to drag my eyes over here to the chat box and see what you all are putting in there. A few of you, in fact, several of you have been dealing with flu and other kinds of illness here in the last week or two. You're not alone, by the way. A lot of other folks are, I've noticed. But Someone thanked me privately for allowing you to have an extension of time. You're welcome. My goal is for you to be successful. I want you to learn. I know that, and I know how hard it is to be in grad school when all 8 cylinders are hitting like they're supposed to. It's particularly challenging when I know some of you have toddlers. Musica has a newborn. And then some of you are actually even caretakers of ill parents. So I understand, but I want you to be successful, and we'll try to get you there as much as we can. Cassandra, work in secondary, and many come up with weak math and literacy skills that started in elementary, but within a district that is generally doing poorly. Yep, they use the IB as a turnaround program. Yeah, a lot of folks are doing that. The IB program typically, like AVID, Cassandra, almost always is deployed at the high school level. More and more, we're seeing those the IB and the advanced placement. We call it pre-AP, and the AVID strategy stuff and the teaming that goes around that, pushed down into the middle level schools. With the interest, almost always, of better equipping students that have not a good history of academic success, begin to acquire the mindset and the skills that'll help them to not only take more rigorous coursework, but be successful as they do it, which opens doors for them down the way. Virginia, Pace, Laughlin, that's actually Jenny, for those of you that don't know. That's a big nope from me. I assume, Jenny, you were talking about the sex ed stuff in Austin ISD, but maybe, I'm not sure. That's the only thing I think of that I said that could have drawn a big nope. I don't know. Yeah. And then Charlotte agrees. And my daughters, I've got daughters that are my daughters are the age of some of you all. They're approaching 40. They're getting dangerously close to 40, and they have the lines in their eyes to show it. But I'm not sure I would have wanted that kind of education delivered to my daughters when they were third graders. But, and then you mentioned MCL. This is Cassandra. Is that an expansion from this week's 6.1 reading? MCL. I mentioned MCL. Oh, mass customized learning. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think in 6.1, yeah. I fed you some content by B. McGarvey. I can't remember if it was in a document form or video form. Someone tell me. It's been a while since I put that in that queue. Slides, okay. Yeah, you can find Dr. McGarvey in videos. You can find interviews of her and other writings. She's a pretty progressive thinker. And we had a faculty meeting, a College of Education faculty meeting today there at LSU Shreveport. And one of the comments that was made, we've got to quit trying to think outside of the box and just destroy the box and think as if there is no box. And that's kind of the mindset and thinking that Schwann and McGarvey go through in that book, Inevitable. Kind of interesting stuff. Stuff I like to think about. But yeah. Someone else asked me a question if you got one. You can either write it or turn your microphone on. I'll talk to you about just about anything you want to. You already know about everything I know with regard to third grade sex ed, so I'm probably not an expert on that. The final for next week will be posted in your week 7 module. and you've already seen that. You saw that, I think, in week 3 in the discussion forum, or is it week 4? One of those weeks, I gave you the entire final, so you already know what's coming at you. I hope you already started on it. Yeah, and on week 7, I'd like for you to have your stuff done in by Saturday night instead of Sunday night. So it gives me a chance to grade through all of your stuff with a little more attention. If you write it, I'm going to read it. I'm not one of those professors that just see if you turned it in. It's not completion grades, and I hope you see that too from the comments that I put in the grade book when I'm posting grades. I want to know what you're thinking. Well, I want to know you're thinking, and then I want to know what you're thinking. Other questions if you got them. Well, we're screaming toward the end. You made it through one holiday, and I have not forgotten what it's like to come back to school after a holiday. And I've been an elementary principal too. I know what it's like to be there on the day after Halloween as well. But yeah, I know you got a break coming up here in a couple more weeks. Most of you are probably going to have school up until about the 20th. But we're in the middle of week 6 on this course, and you got one more week coming up next week. So I think you know this. Use me as you need me. It's a great honor to be able to learn with and from you all. And you won't see me again unless you want to see me again. Certainly, you know how to reach me by email. You have my phone number. And even if you want to schedule a Zoom meeting with me, I'm happy to do that with you as well, since I can't have office hours. All righty? All right. Have a good evening and enjoy.